Bingo, and we're live. It's 3 minutes past 1 on a Tuesday, a warm Tuesday afternoon, here with Jamie Lingham from Absolute Immigration. An absolute delight to have you here. Mate, thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. I'm not sure where you are to be so warm. maybe coming from the UK, it feels warm. You know, like this is our winter, but you know, it's really actually it's not too bad. I think what is it, about 12 degrees or something.
That's positively tropical. I'm in the wilds of East Melbourne, so yeah, it's tropical.
Exactly. No, it is good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I thought this was a really interesting sort of chat for us to have. I think, given what we're going through at the moment, obviously this sort of terrible situations going around the world, there'll be a lot of employers of varying sizes who have varying levels of dependence on migrant workers, on people coming into the country with a whole bunch of different skill sets that they feel they may not be able to get locally. So I thought that might be an interesting discussion, and it might sort of give some people who are watching this some clarity around where we think that sort of thing is going to go. But for the heathens and the uninitiated, why don't you give us just a very quick 1 minute overview of what you do and your business?
Yep, absolutely. We focus more, so we do immigration, obviously processing visas, I'd say would be our sort of core product, but our, I suppose our elevator pitch is we work more on the strategic level. So strategic immigration, looking at attraction and retention strategies, but also, funnily enough, looking at how you would stand down a workforce of overseas foreign nationals. So it's not just how we bring in, how we process visas. Through this period, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of people who've had to be stood down, and companies have come to us and said, well, how can we actually start to disengage these people? Should we disengage these people? And so it's looking at the complexities of how immigration works, how overseas foreign nationals work within organisations, how you manage your overseas foreign national population. It's not, I mean, I always say it's when you recruit locally, instead of that person, you know, going left off the train, they go right, you know, but they still return to their same home, they've still got the same social networks. But bringing people from overseas, you know, as soon as you offer an overseas foreign national job, you put their whole world into turmoil. You know, they're organising accommodation, they're organising transport, they're organising where the kids go to school. You know, there's this whole list of concerns that they go through. And companies, look, the companies are more, HR professionals are more educated now, but there's still companies out there who say, hey, Simon, you've got the job, congratulations, I'll see you on June the 23rd.
Yeah.
And then your head goes crazy. And so what we do is we've done a significant amount of work, particularly so in the mining industry is a classic example. You know, the mining industry was significant skill shortages in Australia. There was a thing called a go-see, where what they do is they invite people from overseas to come and see the area. And I spoke to the English guy and he said, it's great, I've had 3 overseas holidays with the family. So they would say, hey, Simon, bring your family across, come and check out, you know, the Great Barrier Reef and we'll take you down to the mine and, you know, all these sort of things. So it's really working with companies to get the most out of the immigration program. I think that a lot of companies look and say, okay, we've got this sponsored visa or that sponsored visa. And to me, it's, you know, we've got 99 different visas in our toolkit. And so it's like going to the mechanic and saying, hey, I only have a screwdriver and a hammer, but I'm more than happy to fix your car.
Yeah.
So that's the core of what we do. And most recently, we've been very involved in looking at, I think number one was looking at how to manage the existing population of overseas foreign nationals in Australia. We were requested to do a submission to the department to look at how we manage I think back then it was about 2 million people. I think now it's about 1.8 million people. So how's the department going to manage that? What happens if their visa's expiring? What happens if they don't work? There was this list of questions. And so we did an 8-page submission with a couple of other thought leaders in the industry. And more recently, we've been looking at, okay, well, what's going to happen post-COVID? Because the travel restrictions are stopping, that you have to get special exemptions to come over. Those exemptions have been essential workers. So, I mean, this thing is literally a moving feast. This is a week-to-week proposition. And so I always say, disclaimer, what I tell you today is relevant for today, but in a week's time, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And with the recent changes that happened just in Victoria, where we were expecting to go into the next level of relaxation, but we didn't. That's probably a great example of exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't know if I'm the only one who sees the irony in the fact that, Dan Andrews has tried to keep us locked down more than any other state, and we're sort of, it's self-perpetuated, and suddenly we've got explosion of cases. So,
yeah. Brilliant. So just I think to set the scene, I think to maybe give people some context, in terms of sort of migration numbers or a migration policy, how do we sort of rank compared to other sort of Western, if you like, countries?
Yeah, the OECD countries.
Yeah.
I think that, look, we rank quite high on the movement of people. We have a quick stat: Australia occupies 5% of the landmass of the whole globe. I mean, the majority of us obviously are uninhabitable, but we still have this huge chunk of land, and there's 1/3 of 1% of the whole population living here, the global population. So we have 99.97% of our population living outside of our borders. So we're still sort of like the world's best kept secret. We have an ageing population. We have a declining birth rate. We have a population that's just over 25 million people. And I think as far as overseas or temporary visa holders, we've got who live here with rights to work is around about 2 million. So, we have a significant amount of people. And so our program has traditionally always relied on overseas foreign nationals to fill skills gaps that are difficult to find. If you're looking at bringing someone who's coming from a market of 300 million people like in the States and bringing them to Australia to run a project here, I mean, the levels of complexities and the projects overseas have in comparison to Australian projects, to have access to skilled and experienced people is just vital for what we do. And I think that it's not about replacing, there's this whole rhetoric on stealing Aussie jobs and replacing things. I think that the opposite is true. And we've seen it time and time again where companies bring job creators, where they bring people who have skills and experience that help companies retain staff, because you come across, it's like, I've worked on this project here, I've worked on a massive, $4 billion build, or whatever in Dubai, and that keeps people engaged, that keeps existing staff engaged. So to answer your question, as far as our program and the amount of engagement we have with overseas foreign nationals, it is high. It has always been high, and my view, regardless of what happens through COVID, it will still continue to need to be high.
Gotcha. So you're saying that the skilled workers that come here are job creators as opposed to job takers, which is sort of, as you said, this common rhetoric. That's really interesting. Yeah,
and look, I think that the business sponsored programs we have here are some of the most robust in the world. I mean, there's a heavy compliance regime, and I've dealt with a lot of different countries as well, and so we have a significant compliance regime. I think our sponsored program has been reviewed and remodeled and remade, and I think 6 or 7 times. But the interesting thing is, the business sponsored program that most companies will bring staff across on only accounts for 7% of workers in Australia, that visa holders in Australia, that have the right to work. So there's actually 93% of visa holders in Australia who come on student visas or working holidaymaker visas and have the right to work, but the other programs do not have the level of monitoring compliance. So it's sort of the gold standard, or the platinum standard even, of programs that we have and that we're running here. So
interesting. And so the situation we find ourselves in at the moment is, there's probably going to be this sort of period of government wanting to be seen to protect local jobs, which you totally understandable and desirable, of course. What does the current situation mean then for the future migration policy? Are we going to see numbers decline, or what do you think is going to happen?
Look, I think that we have to. You can sort of break this into sections, right? So I think number one is, what is it going to do for companies who can do without employees in Australia? Right? I think that's going to be the great rethink. Well, I don't know, I'll put that as my phrase for COVID, the great rethink. But I think that this is where we're going to have companies say, hang on, do I actually need an on-site marketing person? Do I need an on-site accountant? Do I need, all of those functions that can be done over Zoom? And I think that, you and I, and probably the rest of the world at the moment, know that Zoom is a pretty good tool. We're getting used to it. I think I spent about 6 or 7 hours yesterday on video calls and Zoom calls, and it does mess with you a bit. But I think there's a number of roles that can actually be undertaken outside of a physical office, and so therefore, why can't it be taken outside the country? which I think that this sort of great rethink is going to be positive, but I also think it's going to be negative, because if you look at these companies who say, well, hang on a second, I don't need to bring in this skill set, therefore they're not bringing in a taxpayer. They're not bringing a contributor to the economy. You know, they're not bringing in everything that a good migration program needs. It's not just to fill jobs. Because we have an aging population, declining birth rate, eventually, you know, our population graph looks like this. So all these people who move up into retirement age, we need someone to be able to pay the tax and to contribute to the economy and be part of it.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be interesting. So to answer your question, do I think that it's going to tighten up? Absolutely. I mean, there's 1 million Australians unemployed. But the reality is that these people haven't necessarily been training. They haven't been taking practical workforce experience. You know, everybody's been, I mean, it's the cliche, it's the same storm, but in different boats. We're all in the same storm.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's been gaining an advantage or gaining skills and experience during this time. So I think that everybody is still, you know, a moment frozen in time. And then when things open up again, they're still going to be not in exactly the same position, but in a very similar position. I think we'll see a big change in the skilled occupations list, what occupations are eligible to be sponsored. I have no doubt about that. I think the minimum salary level that companies will have to pay, I think it'll be increased. Okay. If there's still quarantine, I think that companies will have to pay quarantine, pay the fees to have these people in quarantine and take on some sort of obligation if there is any issues with it. And I think that, you know, though these conversations, they still come back to sponsors or employers footing the bill. And so a couple of years ago, immigration fees went through the roof if you're going to sponsor someone. I think it went from, let's call it, you know, $1,200-$1,500 to $10,000. And so, you know, that is on the sponsor as well. And so to me, what this does, it just creates a pause. It doesn't create a complete stop or you know, these companies not bringing people across from overseas. Yeah. What they will do is they will pause and they will say, hang on, do we have people in the local market? They will probably pause again because of COVID and say, let's have another check. But I think that the reality is mathematically, because we have 1 million people, doesn't mean we have 1 million people to fill all of the job vacancies.
Yeah. And do you think it's fair to say that that we've seen manual workers affected more than the knowledge workers, and it's those knowledge workers whose roles potentially employers would look at and say, you know, this person doesn't need to be on site, you know, in a factory, in a warehouse somewhere. So we could potentially have that role outside of Australia, but that's what we want to try and stop.
Well, this is the thing. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because we're sort of thinking, okay, we don't bring in more migrants, but do those jobs go offshore? And if they go offshore, do they come back? Yeah. Because I think once people get used to the new normal, whatever that will look like, I think that they might say, well, hang on a second, I can employ someone in, you know, another country, New Zealand either, I think, you know, has a bit more favourable on the wage front as far as what they'd have to pay sponsored workers, or South Africa or wherever, you know. It might actually open up a few new doorways, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, you know, from a business point of view and from a global point of view. I think from a culture point of view, I think from an engagement point of view, I think all those sort of things, I don't think it's great. One thing I'm not sure if you know, but an unintended consequence of a payment called the Jobkeeper, which our government introduced, that stopped a lot of people who may have been going off to the agricultural sector. Right. And so all of these manual workers, you know, there was Australians who would have said, yeah, I'm happy to go out there, but now they get the Jobkeeper, which is about $750 a week. And these people said, well, hang on, why will I now go to a rural area to look for work if I don't need to? Yeah, gotcha.
I think it's this thing, isn't it? Whatever decision you make at a policy level, it's to impact one thing, it's going to have an impact elsewhere. That's perhaps something we're seeing. Interesting. And so what do you think, you know, for employers now who are sort of in the spot where they're sort of planning you know, pieces of work for when, you know, the new normal, as everyone keeps calling it, takes off, and, you know, part of their plan was to hire skill sets that they know are rare, and normally they'd hold a certain amount of visa spots. Are they still going to be there? Are they going to have to start making other plans? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think having some understanding of how the program will move is super important. I think number one is they're talking about, I mean, tourism not coming back to 2021. I can see occupy. Look, I think that if I was in, looking at these workforce planning issues within a business, I'd say, okay, well, let's break it down to the occupations we need. Let's look at who needs to be on site, who doesn't. I'd start to really separate it out and work out, okay, if we can't get this person, what does it look like? We've been speaking with the department and with various levels of government about how we're going to start to relax the program and how we're going to start to let people back in. At the moment, there's no fixed policy or rhyme or reason for who can come into Australia. You've got to remember, we've got a whole group of people who are sitting outside the borders who went away on holidays. You know, who are sponsored workers, who are overseas foreign nationals, who have a lease and have everything else going on, and they went on holidays and COVID hit, and then bang, the borders closed, and the government says, well, hang on, you are a temporary visa holder. We don't want the liability of having you here. And let's face it, that's the bottom line, right? The government looks at it and says, well, we've got a liability of 1.8 million people sitting in Australia, so therefore you can access your super, right? There'd be a very small percentage of people who have the $10,000 that they could have accessed, just between us. And so, but as these people start to struggle, they are essentially the government's problem. And so they don't want to bring more people back who they could potentially have to be, footing the bill for or helping get through this tough time, because we have enough Australians who are also displaced at the moment. So looking at that group, number one, who have visas, and who are just winding down the clock. You paid a significant amount of money to sponsor someone from overseas. They just say you got the visa the day before the lockdown happened, and then bang, 12 months you can't, go again. So we've been talking about, do you have a process where the person can reapply without a fee to get the additional time? But you've got to remember that actually the government might say, well, hang on, we're going to take a number of occupations off that list. Is it a genuine position? Have you tested the market? So looking at that first wave, if you like, is just to say, okay, who have we got already on sponsored visas, right? And then can we get them back? If they're here, our advice has been not to make anyone redundant until you have to.
Right.
Because the problem is, you make someone redundant, the program gets harder, the labour market testing requirements get more onerous, and then all of a sudden you can't, you've got to go through the whole process again. It may be more costly for you, et cetera, so on and so forth. So I think having a look at that cohort who are here and have visas, or who are offshore and have visas. The second group is, what is it going to look like when we start to open up again? And I think that, and our advice or our sort of conversations have been around, okay, is the person coming in working on a project that exceeds a certain value? Do they come in an occupation which has a skill level, higher skill level? Does that person have a salary which is higher than the Fair Work High Income threshold, which is $149,000, around that sort of figure, plus the super? It'll change on 1 July, by the way. But what I'm saying is, so all of these factors, I think that we have to look at what's our first position. So that's the sort of top of the pyramid. Who are we going to be? Who are job creators, not job creators, And then I think it will go down to the second thing. Okay, this is our second position, but I think this will be a slow unwinding. So if to go back to your question, to say how are companies going to start managing this, I think very carefully. I think making sure that they realise that it's like catching a flight. There's no more ring up. There's a flight every half hour from between Melbourne and Sydney, right? I flew the other day, which was this is a whole discussion outside. It was amazing. I seriously felt like I was in a movie. But anyway, I got off the flight back from Brisbane at 9 o'clock in the morning. I looked at the board, in at Qantas at the terminal. I think there was 9 flights for the whole day.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is, we are in a totally different world. None of the norms that we were used to are going to happen again. And so the access to staff as well is going to be more difficult. And so if you want to add a further layer of complexity, people who want to travel need to get a travel exemption. And I know companies who have been knocked back on the travel exemptions, And so we had a client who was bringing in 3 engineers. 2 of them got through, 1 got knocked back, exactly the same submission.
Right.
And so this is what companies will need to start planning for. I think classic is, what if you run, some highly specialised machines, and you need a technician? Say it stops, the whole thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
You need a technician in to keep your business going. What does that look like? Well, that looks like someone coming across. Do they get the visa? Do you get the exemption? Do they have to quarantine for 14 days? Coming to Victoria, I would say definitely. Are we going to increase it to 21? Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how that's going to go. But what I'm saying is there's just a whole new rule book.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's exactly how companies have to approach it. Say, okay, it's like everything we knew before. Let's just toss that out.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a whole new world, and so there's different ways that we have to operate, and there's different considerations. And so gone are the days of just throwing someone on a plane and bringing them across to sort something out. Gone are the days of saying, I have a skill shortage, I'm going to fill it. I think that the amount of you know, or the amount of work that would be required to bring overseas foreign nationals into a role, it will be substantially more difficult.
Yeah. So there's a couple of really interesting things at your last point. You know, making the time and effort burden to get somebody over might be so high that it makes employers look at, you know, where else we can get that person from. Should we just upskill someone that we've got? I was going to say uptrain. That's not even a word. Just making them up as they go along. Nothing new there. You know, do we upskill someone that we've got already? Do we get more targeted in headhunting somebody? You know, how do we solve that problem? Really high level, without holding you to anything. Obviously, any particular skill sets that you think would be kind of protected in terms of would qualify for visas coming over?
Yeah, look, I think that you know, there's going to be things like the obvious low-hanging fruit to me is infrastructure and construction projects.
Yeah.
We have a number of clients in infrastructure, and they had significant skill shortages pre-COVID. They have them at the moment, and they'll have them post-COVID.
Yeah.
I think that the real danger, and you'd be more across this than me, but from an outsider's point of view, being an outsider of the whole recruitment sort of process, I think there's a danger in a significant wage spike and war for talent internally. Because, you know, with all these infrastructure projects coming on, I can see it being a bit more like the mining boom, where people will be starting to fight, you know, sort of locally. And this is the real shame, because as I said at the start of the discussion, you know, we have 1/3 of 1% of the global population. And so we're just this small, muddy little pond.
Yeah.
But we have an ocean of talent outside, and that's the beauty of the program. So I think that getting that sort of first wave over the $150,000, you know, salary, and I think releasing those pressure valves, I think, are going to be important. I think that one thing that's also interesting, I could tell you there's not many employers, if any, that would have employing overseas foreign nationals as their first option.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is such a cost. It is a time consuming, it's emotionally draining. You know, there's all those sort of things. And so every employer would prefer to employ from the local Australian market. But to your point on upskilling people can take 12 months, or it can take 2 years, you know, et cetera, so on and so forth. There is still going to be a lag. There's still going to be a gap here, because if the government is doing as it's planning, and that's investing a lot of money in infrastructure projects for a start, there's going to be a quick sort of uptick of demand for workers. And so we need to, and that those people aren't going to go in. It's not like MasterChef where you jump on and you've done 12 episodes and all of a sudden you open a restaurant, you know, which is, it's, and that's not going to happen in engineering. I mean, most roles and most industries, it's the years of experience you have. It's going through and being part of a project that had a mistake, and those errors that are teaching people. So you can't just manufacture people out. I know that I read an article yesterday talking about how a lot of the sort of newer universities are going to really struggle, and you know, a lot of the sort of sandstone universities, the Melbourne universities, all this sort of, they're going to prosper because they get a lot of income from other ways. And then what the article was talking about is doing a lot of these sort of, I won't say second tier, but I'll say newer universities will move more into the trade schools, right? And I'm totally for that. I think it's great, but I still think that we have to think in that lag period. And how long does that look like? Is that a 2-year period? Is it a 3-year period? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, as I said, you're better placed in the market to know where the lags are. But I just think to turn around and say, we've got 1 million unemployed people, let's close our borders. What's it going to take us to catch up?
Yeah, I think what we will see is I think we'll see an increase in training and development opportunities. I think training and development functions within larger scale businesses whose job it is to actively look at the people that we've got, identify the people who could progress rapidly to fill some of these roles. I think we're going to see more of an impact and more of a time burden on leaders who can mentor and coach just that bit deeper to get skill sets from their teams coming up. I think I think the ways that businesses internalize some of these challenges and find ways to we're pretty good as a species, right, at finding ways to solve problems. I think the collaborative intelligence of leadership groups looking at ways to solve these things is going to be called on. I think, and I think those businesses that have hired well at leadership level, who have this ability to think laterally sometimes about how do we solve this, they're going to be the ones that that sort of streak ahead when the floodgates open again, if you like.
I think it's also going to be interesting to see what role technology plays. Because I think that, my view's always been, say, for example, manufacturing in Australia, you can either look to go overseas, you can look to automate, or you can look to migrate, some experienced people to run it. And so I think we're in exactly the same position. And in a way, look, I think that COVID has forced a lot of people's hand, which I think is positive. There's certainly aspects of our business that we weren't looking at, or we were sort of toying with, and COVID sort of gave us that kick in the right direction, said, come on, well, let's escalate your plans. And I know a lot of businesses who have done the same thing. But yeah, as I said, I still think there needs to be some sort of ability for companies to access the people. But as I said, it's not just about doing business. It's about building the community. It's about replenishing the population. It's about there's other levers that happen through the immigration process where, and look, I've got to say, there's also one other aspect of the migration program, which I think should be significantly looked at. There's a big push for permanent migration, and I'm not opposed to it. But I do see huge merit in migration programs that can offer someone a job, right? Can offer someone who has to pay their own medical bills, who offers them instant socialisation. I don't know how many Uber drivers or taxi drivers that you've met who have come from overseas who have said, well, I'd never been to Australia. I qualified on the points test. I turned up and then I found it was totally different from what I expected. And I just, a lot of the people in this position are really struggling, and I think if you say, okay, well, let's look at demand-driven migration as opposed to human accumulation. Now, that's a friend of mine, Mark Glasbrook, who says that. I'd like to take that as my own, but I would definitely give credit to Mark. He's an agent in South Australia, and he is very passionate about South Australia and pushing, their sort of whole reform on the migration program. But he's right. I mean, having demand-driven migration, where are the areas we need people across? My question would be, do we look at, is it going to move a bit more onto the temporary area where we say, okay, we've put these training programs in place, there's going to be a lag of 5 years. Are you going to only have a 5-year period? I don't know. I think that's the interesting thing to me. The government will absolutely prioritise Australian jobs. There's no doubt about it. And this whole thing about not giving overseas foreign nationals any handouts, they have on a backhanded way through the Red Cross, but that is exactly about trying to encourage these people to not be reliant on Australia for welfare, which in my view is sad. The 17,000 sponsored workers in hospitality who could be out there picking fruit today, they legally can't do it. And they could be paying tax and they could be doing all those things. But, anyway, that's another podcast.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you so much. That's half an hour, and it's gone like that, and it's been.
Exactly.
But it's something we could talk about all afternoon. So our three sort of headline points then for employers.
Okay. Look, I think that number one, if you are looking at areas that you've got skills shortages, really start to map out what those roles look like. You start to say, if we can't get the role, what will our business? If we can't bring the person from overseas, what will our position look like? I think be prepared to only take, to have people at top levels come in first. I just can't see someone coming in on $60,000 in marketing being an essential person who's a job creator. I'm sorry for all the marketers out there, but I think that that's number one. I think number two, big headline that I've just been, sort of pushing in, try not to lay off or make redundant any overseas foreign nationals who you've sponsored. You can stand them down. There'll be a whole discussion that the compliance regime will have as a sort of COVID period. Don't reduce their wage. You can reduce their hours, the same pro rata rate, or you can stand them down altogether. I would inform the department, but the reason I say that, so even if you've got people overseas, if you can keep the people on the visas you had, if there is a bounce back, then you want to make sure you've got them and you don't have to jump what will be a lot more hoops and a more difficult obstacle course to get these people across.
So protect your position now is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So just consolidate where you are, make sure that you've got the people who you have. And I think three is to be prepared, if you are going to employ people from overseas, for it to be a more costly process. I think be prepared to understand that quarantine's involved in that. There'll be more onerous labour market testing. Will you have to write bigger submissions? Will it be more costly? Will you have to pay more? I think all those things will happen. And, as I said, I think that if the people are really needed, it will just create a further pause. I don't think it'll create a stop. I think that you can't, if I've got an infrastructure project I'm doing and I need to get 10 guys in tunnelling, I have to bring them in. Then you just say, okay, that's the cost of the project. So then to that end, do I start to say, well, my bid that I put forward, I need to factor those costs in? Because the problem with I see is with immigration is that most people look at immigration line item just as the visa application fee and the migration agent fee. What they don't realise is there's actual costs outside of that. And I think starting to understand the overall cost of bringing someone from overseas and then making a business decision if that's the right way forward or right way for you, I think that's where I'd be as a business.
Yeah. And if someone wanted to understand more about those costs, could they find that on your site? Should they?
Yeah, look, I mean, I just say just give me a call. Just get in contact with me. I've been on the phone. I've made myself as available as possible through this period, and which has been great. I think that, there's a lot of people with a lot of questions, and just, pick up the phone, have a chat. I'll have a chat to people no matter what, and just give them top level advice. And if it goes to turn something feels like work, I'll tell them. But I just think being strategic about this is super important. I think understanding how to work the program, I think it's vital. And rather than just going to someone who's going to transact what you do, you say, I think I need this, and they go, yep, transact. It's like, bang, I think my car needs a hammer. Yeah, sure. No, it doesn't. Yeah.
Right, brilliant. Well, we'll put your contact details in the comments of this. But just over half an hour gone. You've probably got other things to do. I've got another one that I'm going to be late for. Jamie Lingham, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And we'll catch up in person when this is all over.
That's great. Thanks for having me, Simon. All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Stay safe. Bye.